This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie, where you can double your first deposit. Head to mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining you after, this one hurts. Ouch, Gator fans. It was there for the taking. But Florida loses its third straight game to Georgia, 24-17. I am a little deflated after this one. This was the year to get Georgia, as we've discussed the last couple of weeks. But Georgia shows up in Jacksonville and once again gets the Gators. To help me break it all down on this episode is Will Sammon from The Athletic. Will, man, I think it's fair to say the Gators were outplayed, outmanned, outcoached by Georgia. In this game yesterday. Florida had some chances, had some crucial bad calls from the refs, still had a chance to overcome all that, but fall short by a touchdown.
Yeah, I think you covered it there with everything you listed.
We're done.
Yeah, sounds good. But no, Georgia looked like the better team. I know a lot of people have sort of brought up the final score and it being closer than maybe what a lot of fans are kind of talking about as far as Georgia outplaying them. But for a large portion of that game, Georgia never looked like it was going to lose. It always looked like it was in pretty firm command of that game. Maybe toward the end when Florida had an opportunity to kind of, if they were to get a 3-and-out on that drive, and if they would have gotten the ball, then that would have changed that conversation a little bit, but that didn't happen. So yeah, I'm with you. It was just it was the absolute wrong time for Florida to turn in that kind of performance, because that's not really the team that we watched the previous 8 or 9 games.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I thought Gators definitely didn't play their best game. I thought it would take that there, and I absolutely did not get that. So we'll break it all down. We'll get into, of course, the defense's problems on third down, Florida's slow start on offense. And a lot of your listeners' tweets out there who send them in. But before we get there, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes. Catch us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Please share, rate, and review the show out there. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. And follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter at Gators Breakdown. And don't forget, every week you can catch me with Ben Troop, former Gators tight end, on Talking with Troop, a News 4 Jax exclusive. So, Will, I think we know where to start here, and that's the performance of Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm against this Gators defense here. Will, sometimes the game of football, you think you know how something will play out, and we all felt great about Florida's chances if they were able to limit the Georgia run game. And they did. They limited DeAndre Swift. He still had some yards, but it wasn't your usual DeAndre Swift performance you expect in Georgia. Florida did that. Swift went for 25 carries, gaining 86 yards, 3.4 yard average. If somebody would have given you those stats before the game, you would have taken it. So, Gators did their job there, but after the last 2 games and giving up over 200 yards each to LSU and South Carolina on the ground, Florida did what they needed to in that aspect. And going back and looking at the LSU game, we were also focused on the passing game, that the LSU run game ended up being a killer there as well. Well, against Georgia, focus was so much on the Bulldogs run game that the Georgia passing game ends up being the difference in the game. Jake Fromm torches a Todd Grantham defense once again. Florida can't get a pass rush. In return, can't force any turnovers, can't get off the field on third down. Jake Fromm ends up going 20 of 30, 279 yards and 2 touchdowns. Lawrence Cager returns for Georgia. He had 7 of those catches for 132 yards and a 52-yard touchdown catch where Sean Davis just gets lost on the play. But, of course, story of the game, Georgia's third down production, the difference in the game. The Bulldogs converted 12 of 18 third downs with an average distance to go of 7.2 yards. That's not supposed to happen there. That's the numbers don't match up, but it did. So third and Grantham was alive and well. 8 of the third downs were converted through the passing game as Fromm went 10 of 13 for 119 yards on third down. So, Will, Gators did everything they were supposed to get Georgia in favorable third down situations for the defense. Gators couldn't get pressure with the return of Grenard and then limited Zuniga, and Zuniga's end up playing inside because, the ankle flares up again and kind of playing in, not the role that we know him to play best in. And couldn't get to Fromm consistently. The very few times that did get to him, he found a way to get loose. Last 2 years, the defense has forced no turnovers and only 1 sack. And that goes all the way back to not being able to create havoc up front against this Georgia offensive line. And the last 2 years, Fromm has thrown for 5 touchdowns, no interceptions versus Todd Grantham's defense. And go back to 2017 when Grantham was at Mississippi State with Mullen and against Georgia. Fromm had 2 more touchdowns there as well, Will. So, man, Grantham really has no answer for a Jake Fromm-led offense from the Bulldogs.
Well, yeah, it looks like that. Also, a couple of things there. Jake Fromm's pretty good. A lot of people were really down on that guy heading into this game after a couple of his performances, and there was that stat that I even used too in one of my articles, suggesting that or saying that when Georgia is like 0-5 or something like that when Jake Fromm was forced to throw the ball at least like 30 times. And so that was more of a statement of that not being the style of play that Georgia preferred. It was not necessarily meant to be like a knock on Jake Fromm. I actually think that he's a pretty talented QB, one of the smarter guys playing the position in college football too. So he's somebody that you trust back there to make plays and to read defenses, especially pre-snap, and he accomplished that again against Florida Saturday afternoon. I also saw a lot of people not give credit to Georgia's offensive play calling. I thought that was really sharp, and I think that's worth pointing out. And I agree with you. One of your points that you made about the pass rush, it just wasn't there. And sometimes Ty Grantham was blitzing guys, and he was sending, an extra defender here and there, but they just weren't getting there. And that's a credit to the Georgia offensive line, which, by the way, includes a couple of high-end 4-star and 5-star prospects, which is something that Florida does not have on its offensive line.
Yeah, and Will, overall, I think the defensive performance can best be labeled as frustrating. I mean, besides the pure third down conversion stat, and that's the main reason for this loss, the terrible non-reversal Cager catch where the ball clearly hit the ground, not under control, but Cager there. Was that big? Absolutely. Yes, it led to a Georgia touchdown, but it was just, consistent soft coverage by the Gators there and some miscommunication where Georgia was able to take advantage. Not sure why there's a lot of soft coverage out there, but we've seen a lot of it this season, more so than I thought we would, especially with Wilson and Henderson back there. And good QBs can take advantage of that. Good quarterbacks are going to take advantage of that. We've seen it with Burrow and Fromm so far this year. While we're kind of discussing the secondary, we've questioned the safety rotation all year, and yet here we are in a game where Sean Davis and Brad Stewart give up 2 of the biggest plays later in the fourth quarter of the game here. Trey Dean is abused early on in the game. Georgia really attacking him, taking advantage. They were able to take advantage of safety play by the Gators as well. I mean, Georgia kind of just knew what they wanted to do in this game and really attack Florida's weak points in the defense. And we know Trey Dean has struggled in the nickel star position. We've known safety play has been inconsistent there. And and I was listening to an interview with Lawrence Cager, and basically just what I said, they knew places they could take advantage of this Florida offense. And he even mentioned they weren't sure how Florida would line up against them because of Georgia has struggled against man coverage so far this year and their receivers, and they weren't sure how Florida would come out, but consistently Florida kept showing soft coverage, and they felt comfortable in finding a weakness in the soft spots, a weakness in the zone. And Lawrence Cager just talked about it. He said they felt comfortable about if Florida was going to line up that way, they knew exactly how they were going to attack.
Yeah, I saw that same interview, so I'm glad that you brought it up. My thing though is that I'm not sure if the answers are readily available. Like what do you do if you're switching it? I think maybe something that I would probably like to see a little bit more of is maybe Marco Wilson in that sort of star position instead of Trey Dean, and you see a little bit more opportunities for Kaiir Elam. Mm-hmm. I think he's played really well in limited action so far this year, especially as a true freshman. So that's one thing that I would see. But as far as if you were to do it over, David, is there anything that kind of comes to mind from your perspective on what they may have been able to do differently defensively?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can say is maybe man up more with
Yeah.
Wilson and Henderson. I mean, that's really about it. Like I said, Georgia was really firmly in control with their play calling and being able to say maybe something changes, but I mean, Georgia knew what they wanted to do in this game and kept it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Florida did a great job in the run game. I think they should be commended for that, absolutely, and stopping the wave for that game to get blown wide open was for Georgia to be able to run the ball. Florida kept this game close because they were able to stop the run. Swift couldn't get anything going on the inside tackles. And you started seeing as the game went on, they started testing the edges a little bit more. Swift using his speed to get outside. Georgia got a little creative in the play calling to get him outside there against this Florida defense. But yeah, for the most part, I think the only change that honestly that we maybe could have seen, and I don't even know if it makes a difference, is just maybe a little more press man coverage against these Georgia wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I agree. I didn't ask that question in order to kind of like throw a blanket excuse or just say like, oh hey,
Yeah.
they did everything they can. I don't necessarily like believe that line of thinking. I think I'm just saying that they got flat out whipped. On that side of the ball, particularly on third downs. I mean, it's just that's what happened. You got beat, and there was a lot of reasons for that, and each one, yeah, there were some similarities in some cases, but on one there was a blown coverage, on another there wasn't enough pass rush, on another there was a missed assignment. So it's like you kind of just go down the list, and it's like there's a couple of different reasons for like each single one of those third down conversions not working out. And the only real common denominator is Georgia just being in control and looking at a matchup and saying, hey, we're going to hit this one, and then executing it fairly well throughout the entire game.
Well, I mean, I mentioned the run game and what Florida was able to do there. And don't get me wrong, we know the main story, and Florida still lost because of basically, couldn't stop Jake Fromm. But as I said, I think we should commend the defense for what they were able to do in the run game. Jonathan Grenard came back and had an impact in this game. Zuniga, when healthy, had an impact early on in this game. Georgia still converted when he was healthy. They were still converting third downs on the first drive of the game. They ended up settling for a field goal, but you could see some of the impact that Zuniga and Grenard were able to make there in limiting Swift. There was the holding call that brought back a Swift touchdown, of course, as well. But just all in all, it wasn't overall, yes, a terrible performance, but they were able to stop the run game.
Yeah, it's just like they did. Jake Fromm just had all day to throw on a lot of those
Yeah.
passes, and that's really, you give a guy who I just said earlier in our conversation was so smart, pretty cerebral player. Really, I think I can't say it enough. He's a smart dude who knows what he's trying to do back there. And so if you're giving a guy like that time, he's going to make some plays. And there was one play. Also, I think it was the touchdown that he missed when he tried to extend the play earlier in the game. Now that's kind of, in my opinion, the play that kind of separates him from like your elite quarterbacks in the country. But like that's the play that he's not making, but he makes all the other ones, I feel like, and that's like one of those extremely spectacular plays that would have went for a touchdown. And that's really, a play that not a whole lot of QBs are going to make anyway. So that's really the difference, I think, between him. So all that to say, you were playing against a pretty good quarterback and an offense that, yeah, it had its struggles with wide receivers getting open. But one way to sort of overcome that is to give them more time, which is what Georgia did pretty much every single occasion, it felt like.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that's kind of where I was going to go next. With him having all day to throw, Georgia hasn't necessarily, with Jake Fromm, this has been his third season, hasn't necessarily used the middle of the field a whole lot. And since he had so much time, you saw the middle of the field being used a good bit, some drag routes, crossing routes, tight end coming all the way across the formation in the big catch there in the fourth quarter to seal the game for Georgia, all because he had time to throw. So, yeah, you kind of throw over you can throw to the edges with receivers you trust when you don't have a lot of time to throw. But with him sitting back there all day to throw, I mean, the whole field, every route was available for him to kind of cycle through, go through, and figure out the play that needed to be made.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of like Florida's offense for a little while, to be honest with you, because then there were
Mm.
times where he would just dump off a pass and he would just take the 5 to 7 yards, and they kind of just keep them on schedule, which was something that Florida was not doing. Florida was getting behind a lot of times, and it was the complete opposite for Georgia, which, yeah, they converted a lot of times some long third down conversions, but for the most part, they were also staying on schedule throughout their drives, though, and kind of picking up a couple of yards here, a couple of yards there, and then hitting that third down.
Yeah. Well, anything about secondary play besides the safeties that we kind of figured them out, but Marco and CJ, Marco's tackling, of course, probably can be a sore spot. We can talk to here, not wrapping up. He was in position a couple of times, just wanted to hit a guy, not necessarily wrap up and tackle. We're what now 8 games through or 9 games into this game for this Florida, and hate to say it, but this secondary and what we like to label this Florida secondary is DBU. Man, after the LSU game and the Georgia game, they're definitely not living up to that moniker, and definitely not living up to the expectation we thought coming into this season.
No, and yeah, like the expectations were high, and they were applicable. I mean, you're talking about C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson, 2 of the best cornerbacks in the country, certainly in the conference at the very least. And then you're throwing in some guys who you thought in theory would be better just because they were more experienced within Todd Grantham's defense as far as the safeties go. And we just haven't seen like that sort of consistency and any sort of like progression that you feel comfortable with from one week to the next. Sean Davis has played well, particularly in spurts, but you just haven't seen like other guys really make a move this year, whether that's Brett Stewart or Taylor or Donovan Steiner or whoever else. They just have not made that consistent move up to where you're like, okay, we feel good about these 2 guys. I just don't feel like you have those 2 guys.
Right, and Sean Davis had a chance to make an interception, goes up with one hand for whatever reason instead of trying to make a just make a catch, trying to make a highlight catch there, and you almost has an interception there that would have helped Florida. As I say, Florida can't cause turnovers when they're playing Georgia, and 2 years in a row now where Fromm just ate them alive on third downs and not getting any sacks and turnovers. So. Kind of a mismatch here. Hopefully, Will. I hope Jake Fromm does just goes to the NFL. I don't want to see him again next year.
Hey, there may be a decent chance of that. And
yeah.
What you get Carson Beck, so that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
I guess he'll be the next guy, the kid who's not even on campus.
Right, exactly. So maybe next year you take your chances with a young Georgia offense. But man, frustrating performance from the defense for sure. And Gator fans, for sure, we'll get into your thoughts on that as well. So, Will, third down offense wasn't an issue for Georgia, but it was a huge issue for the Gators offense. Only converting 2 of 9 on third down. Florida's first third down conversion didn't come until 7:10 left in the game. A lot of credit goes to Georgia defense here for keeping this Florida offense and Kyle Trask out of rhythm, out of sync, while their offense was controlling the game by converting third down after third down. That helped their defense by not letting the Florida offense on the field and finding a groove here. Dan Mullen's a very in-groove type of play caller, and Florida just could not get into any type of groove there. I think it was only 20 plays in the first half.
Yeah, no, it was something like 30 through three quarters or something like that. It was I believe it was like the low 30s after 3 quarters, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, look, we go back first drive of the game. Florida's driving and have to go for it on 4th and inches, and pass falls incomplete as Pitts looks like he's getting held there by the Georgia defender, but I know it's catch-22, and we go back in the revisionist history here. I didn't like the call there, and that might have been the first sign that Mullen didn't trust his offense to produce in the run game, didn't trust his offensive line. Maybe that was a signal early on there. Gators' offense for the game, very, very one-dimensional, and that's one aspect of this Gators' offense, of not being able to get anything on third down. Florida's average distance to go on third down was 10.9 yards. So basically, third down was 3rd and 11 for the game. Florida was in 3rd and long because they could not run the ball or just decided not to. And I can see where it's the thought that maybe Florida abandoned the run too soon, but the Gators tried to rush the ball on first down 7 times and only gained 15 yards. So compare that to going 12 of 17 in pass attempts for 185 yards, and you can see why Mullen wanted to throw the ball. They were throwing the ball with success on first down, a lot more success than they were in running the ball. So, compared to two teams on first down, Florida averaged 8 yards on first down, while Georgia averaged 8.1. Not a big difference there. So, but it was Georgia's ability to convert third down while Florida couldn't. Mentioned having to go 10.9 yards on average on third down. Well, Florida only gained 4.3 yards average on third down, not even close to converting there. So 3 of 5 passing for 28 yards and 4 rushes for 11 yards on third down for the Gators. Stark contrast, Will, between what both teams were able to do on third down.
Yeah, and it's just that was underscored in the time of possession statistic. It was overwhelmingly in Georgia's favor throughout the entire game, up until like that really, really long drive in the end of the fourth quarter, I guess, with 10 minutes left.
Yeah,
that kind of skewed the statistic a little bit, but man, it was definitely in Georgia's advantage throughout the entire game. And you mentioned the run game. It wasn't like Georgia completely shut it down. They didn't go to it, Florida.
Yeah.
They didn't try it. Michael Piron had like 5 or 6 carries by the second quarter or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he only finished with a handful. So they just didn't go with it. And what I find interesting and something that's worth asking Dan Mullen about this week is just like that. So like that 4th and inches play. Last year he would have went with like a QB sneak or something with Franks. And I just don't know like why you wouldn't do that with Kyle Trask, or like why not try it with Kyle Trask? Is he just not going to pick it up? Are you just like that much that you're not going to win that battle? Like that, do you feel that strongly that you're not going to win that battle at the line of scrimmage? Because I think even earlier in the season before Felipe Franks got hurt, he was still going with that play a little bit. So that's been something that he's always done too. So I just don't know why we haven't seen that with Kyle Trask, because I just feel like, I mean, he's what, 6'5"? He's got a body to him. It's not like he's completely different in that regard. So that's one thing that's worth asking about. And I also thought on that 4th down or the 3rd down before it that maybe we should have seen Emory Jones there as opposed to seeing Emory Jones when we did, which was after a couple of deep passes by Kyle Trask. So there's like a lot of nitpicking that we can go back and forth on within the offense and the offensive play calling and just the lack of execution throughout. But it really does go back to the idea that Florida was never able to kind of establish what it wanted to do in this game. It never got into a rhythm, never got into a flow. And I think Dan Mullen's offense, a lot of it is predicated on being able to kind of set things up for not only within a drive, but for the next drive or for the next quarter. And he was just never able to get any of that done.
Absolutely here. Another frustrating part about this game, mental mistakes that played Florida, Will. I mean, had to waste early timeouts, and then in the fourth quarter, wide receivers get crossed up where they're supposed to be lining up, have to waste a timeout there. And, man, you could really see Dan Mullen chewing out Billy Gonzalez in that situation. And this was after coming off of a bye week in the biggest game of the season. You can't have things like that happen. And Florida's usually pretty clean in those aspects of a game, but couldn't have picked the worst time for that to show up. So, in going back and previewing this game, we talked about having to stop DeAndre Swift and, what Florida could do on offense and all that stuff, and things you don't ever account for or things like this, and especially for a Dan Mullen coach team, because penalties are not ever really a huge issue. Lining up and the little things usually add up for a Florida team to win, but the little things added up here for a Florida team to lose.
And you saw that early too, when they had to use 2 timeouts in the first drive just because they just looked like they were unprepared. Yeah. So like right away, you kind of got the idea that okay, something's a little bit weird with this game right now for Florida, especially coming off an idle week where everybody, me included, we're talking about how much of an advantage that could be, and looking at the matchup between Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen and saying, hey, Dan Mullen's the guy who's known as the X's and O's guy, not Kirby Smart necessarily. And, it's Dan Mullen who's known as the guy who makes, the in-game calls or knowing how to use the clock or just knowing sort of the time and circumstance to do certain things or make certain decisions, not Kirby Smart. But we saw the complete opposite sort of unfold in a lot of ways. And just Georgia looked like the much more prepared team for this game. And again, that was clear early on, and it showed up a little bit down the stretch too, like you mentioned, when Dan Mullen was upset with Billy Gonzalez on the sideline just for not having the right personnel, it looked like, on the field. or not getting the right call in, perhaps. And that was something that we saw a couple of weeks ago. I think maybe it was Tennessee game, if I'm not mistaken. But even so, it's like you're coming off of an idle week, and like these are things that just shouldn't have happened. And Dan Mullen, to his credit, took accountability for it, but it doesn't erase the fact that it was a major issue, I felt like, for this game.
Absolutely. You probably are seeing it too coming out right now, Will, but I know most people will listen to this as a recording, but we are recording this on Sunday at 3:26, and Willie Taggart has been fired by FSU. So kind of, I guess, surprising, but not so surprising news. And that we'll get right back into recovering this or reviewing this Florida Georgia game. But Will, it kind of, wow. Odell Haggins will be named interim head coach for Florida State, but after the shellacking by Miami, putting on FSU, some big news here the day after that. FSU, I guess, finding ways to get rid of Willie Taggart.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I'm not sure if that's a good thing for Florida recruiting, because this was not going well for Florida State.
Yeah.
Willie Taggart era, obviously, it ended the way it just did. Any change for Florida State is probably an upgrade, right? You would think.
You got to take advantage like right now.
Yeah, yeah, you absolutely better, because the window may close depending on who they hire. Yeah. Now, a lot of times, media. So I'm going to throw myself in here. Everybody, we make a proclamation right when a hire is made that, oh, that's going to be terrible for recruiting for so and so. And people did that with Willie Taggart and Dan Mullen, and it's been the opposite. But you just don't know, and you don't know who they're going to bring in. So yeah, you better. And this is something I wrote about after the game against Georgia. The window is there, not only with Florida State, but also with Miami, sort of not having a good year, obviously, either. And so the window is here. And it's like, it's kind of a shame for Florida to not be able to take complete advantage. I think they're doing fine right now. I mean, their class is number 10. Mm-hmm. We all know that doesn't mean as much because they're number 5 in the SEC, but they're still doing better than Miami, Florida State. Again, not saying much there, but they are. They just got to widen that gap even further.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. A little bit of breaking news here if you're watching this live, but wow, there we go. So, all right, back to Florida, Georgia here, unfortunately. So, I guess, somewhat, some good news there, some bad news there, as you say. It is a catch-22 here.
I mean, it's bad because it's like, crap, like that's your rival is really spinning now. I mean,
yeah.
To do it in year 2, not even the season's over. Jeez.
Yeah.
At the same time, like I said, you don't know who they're going to bring in.
Right. Okay. All right. So something I mentioned in the preview last week, Will, was, man, Florida needed to get off to a good start in this game, and and maybe play with a lead, and it didn't happen. Florida was held scoreless for the first time this season in the first quarter. Georgia was up 10-0 in the game. Going back, and part of that was just not being able to get on the field on offense, and once they did, not doing anything with it. 26 plays in the first 42 minutes, 3 points. Then finally got something going on this was a 9-play, 80-yard drive to close the lead to 16-10. Georgia responds to extend the lead 24-10. After that, Florida got the TD they needed, but it came somewhat at a cost in a way. 17 plays, 75-yard drive that took 6 minutes and 50 seconds. Now, look, the touchdown was absolutely needed. You have to have it to have any chance there, but you would have liked to see a sense of urgency, because it put the defense on the field in a situation of having to go out there and force a 3 and out, and to have a chance. And it was asking a lot, given how the defense had been playing so far in the game. So in putting all that together for the offense, while the defense did play poor, I called Georgia to score 24 points last week in my prediction, and they hit that. But I expected Florida to score more. But a slow start, not being able to hit big plays like we've seen, accustomed to seeing for this Florida offense, forced Florida to use a lot of the clock in the fourth quarter, really contributed to a Georgia win. Georgia did a great job in not letting this Florida offense get comfortable in anything. There was a nice start to the game with Pitts, but it never really amounted to anything. It seemed like, 2 steps forward and 5 steps back for this Florida offense. Every time it seemed like they were going to get a drive going, you had the big lost yard sack to Trask or untimely penalty or something like that. It was just it seemed like there was a little there, especially at the beginning with Pitts. It took forever for a wide receiver to get a reception. It was Pitts and P. Ryan, I think, almost the entire first and a half quarter before a wide receiver had ended up catching a pass. But they were moving the ball when they did have the ball a bit in the first quarter, but just nothing consistent for this Gator offense.
No, and again, it was reminiscent just watching the other side of it when Georgia was driving, how much of that sort of like reminded me of like a Dan Mullen offense a little bit, because it was like these like long methodical drives. And Dan's really good at that just because, and he's known for that. It's been successful for him because it always keeps his defenses a little bit fresh. And so Florida was not able to, Florida was the other team in that situation on Saturday, where their defense was on the field so long, and then when their offense got on the field, it just seemed like it was a 3 and out or a short drive where they were just not able to get anything accomplished. And so you look at a weird game for Florida, where you say to yourself, okay, if Georgia scores 24 points, I felt like that was a decent amount for Florida to think like, okay, if Georgia scores 24, they could still win the game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe Georgia would score anywhere from like 21 to like 26, 27 points, something like that, and Florida would still be able to win. And so for Georgia to score 24 and really everybody to be talking about the defense for Florida, and rightfully so, the offense here doesn't get a free pass by any means. I mean, they were bad third down too, and it just looked like, I know that the plan for Dan Mullen was a little bit kind of tossed out the window because of the circumstances early on. And again, they weren't able to get the ball. They weren't able to hold on to the ball and really sort of hone in on what the game plan originally was. And so there had to be an adjustment, but still, it's like nothing seemed to be working until, again, like you mentioned, that really, really long drive. And just to kind of spell it out further, you're talking about, you need to score first, and that you got to score first to score again, obviously. But the amount of stress, like you mentioned, to put on your defense, because if you score earlier, you're allowing your defense to give up a first down, still have to play with, don't have to really get a 3 and out there. But the way that they scored, it was like, if you don't get a 3 and out, you lose, and that's what happened. So yeah, it was just a very, very weird game on both sides of the ball for Florida, and just wrong time for this type of performance on both sides.
And and if it didn't happen back at LSU too, when they had that long drive, and that's the drive that ended with the option, getting stopped on the goal line. But that was another drive where they needed to score. You're down by a couple scores. You're actually driving, but it's taking forever to get down the field. And I don't know what it is. I know the LSU of Baton Rouge, you're on the road and you see Kyle Trask making changes at the line and trying to get protections in the right spot. And that's the same thing we saw here in Jacksonville too. Maybe it's a little easier at home, but maybe that's some of the inexperience with Kyle Trask too. I don't necessarily know why. I mean,
I think also it's just like their offense is so focused on taking what the defense gives them to like. And then in a lot of those situations, the defense is giving you those short yardage situations, short yardage pickups. So like you are able to get like 12, 15 yards. You're not able to necessarily get the 25, 30 plays. But you're able to kind of get those, dinks and dumps here and there. And I don't know. I just feel like that's what Florida was doing, and that's what they kind of felt comfortable with, just because that's kind of what their offense is to a large degree. But yeah, it's like, you got to adjust there. You got to, I guess, pick up the tempo, in my opinion, because, again, it puts your defense in a bind. And I know the capability of Florida's defense. We all saw that against Auburn. We saw that in instances late in games, in the red zone. Again, they played fairly well in the red zone to a large degree, or against Georgia, too, for that matter. But you're asking a lot for a team that really it didn't have its best day. And to kind of put them in that situation, I just don't know if that's reading the game the way it was playing out.
All right, we'll get to some of your tweets out there, listeners. Thank you. You sent a whole lot of them for your reaction to this Florida-Georgia game. But before we do, it's hard to believe there's only about a month left in this college football regular season and almost halfway through the NFL season. So now is the time to get off the sidelines and get in the game with MyBookie. MyBookie is the premier place to bet on all your favorite pro and college football action every weekend. MyBookie has the most up-to-date lines and the most prop bets of any sports book on the planet. So if you're going to bet this season, do the smart thing and bet at MyBookie. If you're the kind that likes to bet a little and win a lot, then try a parlay. Pick your locks for the week, put them in one parlay bet, and when they all come through, the rewards will be huge. And if you're tired of watching the games from the couch with nothing to gain, MyBookie wants to get your mind off everything else and get in the game. So right now, double your first deposit at MyBookie. Use promo code Gators to activate the offer. MyBookie online today at mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.ag. And don't forget to use the promo code Gators when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. All right, so some of your tweets out there, and let's see. Let's start with. Oh, I lost my little spot there. Here we go. Kyle Walker says, "For me, it was how we lost against LSU. We were matching each with minimal penalties and mistakes. Felt like a great game. Georgia just felt choppy with bad execution out of the bye week. I was satisfied after the LSU game. This week, it felt like we took a step back." And we spoke to some of that there. It definitely does feel like a step back. Gator Nation was ready for this game, ready to see kind of how they matched up against Georgia. As we said, a Georgia team that was struggling. Many looked at this as the chance to get Georgia. You had a quarterback that was playing well. You had an offensive line that you hoped was kind of making progress. You had a bye week to kind of prepare there. A defense that maybe didn't play as soft as they had coming into this game because you had a bye week to maybe change some things there. But we saw still Trey Dean at star and getting taken advantage of. And it just kind of seemed like the sloppiness and then some of the same things we've seen that have hurt the Gators throughout the season just kind of rear its head and get magnified this game.
Yeah, and also this was not the greatest Georgia team that we've seen. I felt like at least, and so this gave you that opportunity, but also like you kind of took a step back just because you were in the college football conversation at number 6 in the country, and now you wind up in the AP 10. Obviously, the college football playoff poll will come out for the first time this year on Tuesday, but you're going to be an afterthought in that conversation at this point. Like that's kind of done for at least for now, at the very least for now, and probably for the entirety of the rest of the season. But that's how you kind of took a step back. But in terms of just overall, like my impression of the team, it kind of doesn't change a whole lot. I feel like the deficiencies were just on full display at the wrong time because against a weaker team, maybe you still win that game, even though it's not your best performance. But it's just you're not going to be able to cut it against a team like Georgia playing that way. Yeah,
and your credit to Georgia too. As I said, I mean, you said it too. The way Jake Fromm has been playing, and credit to them too. I mean, they did what. Put it this way, I go back and look at it, and Will, I know you hit it on your article. We'll discuss it too. I mean, this game was simply just look at the trenches on both sides and what Georgia's offensive line was able to do in protecting Jake Fromm and what they were able to do in controlling Florida's run game. They pressured Kyle Trask at the right time as well for a lot of the day. And look, you guys know I've talked plenty about recruiting on here and how much it's magnified in the SEC. You have to recruit well, and you can't afford a bad day out there against a good team, potentially great team. We'll see where Georgia goes after this. This game was won and lost in the trenches.
You got to recruit on the lines, and it takes a while for those groups, particularly the offensive line, to develop. Yep. So, like the guys that Florida has, a couple of those guys they didn't recruit, right? Dan Mullen and John Hevesy, and so it takes like 3 years usually for a guy to really develop. But when you're recruiting the 5-star guys or the high-end 4-stars, a couple of those guys for Georgia are in the 2 deep, and at least one of them is starting, who was part of that 2018 class, and that was a Dan Mullen Florida signing class or Florida year for Dan Mullen. That was his class, and so it's like Georgia was signing guys, Florida was signing guys, Georgia was signing better guys. So that's to me a glaring difference between the two schools. If you're looking about and talking about, well, where does it show the talent differential? It shows primarily, I believe, at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian Hicks has a shout out here to you, Will. He said, Will Sammon wrote it best, missed opportunity. So exactly this is what it was. Even with all the issues, we lose by 7 preseason. Most everyone had us losing this one. We had the opportunity yesterday. Speaks volumes about how far we've come in 2 years. Again, we're okay. That's a sentiment, Will, I did throw out there as well as far as fans go. Look, I mean, Yes, this loss is disappointing. Believe me, I hate losing to Georgia. It's not acceptable. But in the grand scheme of things, man, I also remember where this game was 2 years ago and how far Florida was. And look, and JJ Gatorman, a guy out there on Twitter, put it best too. Florida was in this situation for it to be a big game because of Dan Mullen and what he's brought to the table. In 2 years in a row, this game is a top 10 matchup. Don't get me wrong. Eventually, he is going to have to win this game. He is going to have to. But, in the grand scheme of things, out there looking at it, there's still a lot to play for this season. You got to, as we talk about FSU and firing Wheeler Taggart, you still got to go out there and prove to recruits that that this program is making progress. And there's no better way than to go out there and finish this season 10-2.
Well, yeah, because that would be progress too.
Yeah.
That would be a step, tangible progress where you could say, we got better this year. Here's the proof. We have one more win. And they spoke all spring about how difficult that was. And it wasn't just smoke. I mean, that's a real thing. It is very difficult to go from 9 wins to 10 wins. That's especially in the SEC where you don't really get a let up in the conference. So it's a difficult thing. And I agree with that person who tweeted that, just because you do need to kind of reflect and say to yourself, not only is this team out of sort of like the doldrums of the 2010s where there was like some tantalizing moments where, hey, maybe this is when Florida is going to be back and it doesn't happen. Here, it's more of like a steady growth or a build up towards something, I still feel like. And if they could get to 10 wins, that's a successful season. Like right now is still a successful season for Florida because like that person said, you were in the conversation. And that's also why it stings for Florida fans. Mm-hmm. Frankly, they should be pissed because it's like, hey, we were right there. We were right there. The poll comes out Tuesday. We could have been talk of the conversation, really. One of the more interesting conversations about the playoffs could have been Florida, and that's not going to happen. It's probably going to be Georgia who takes that spot in the conversation. So that's going to hurt, and you have every right to be pissed off about that, frankly. But again, you take a deep breath, and you say to yourself, okay, like we're still ahead of the game. When you look at in comparison where you were in 2017 when you made that switch, it's just you have to close out strong. You have to win the 3 games, and you got to look probably pretty good doing so to kind of keep people optimistic and happy. And then after that, you got to hit with recruiting again.
Absolutely. Nicholas Goldsmith says Georgia was due a good game and they picked the perfect one. I think we let Fromm get too comfortable early in the game, which set the tone. If we can't let our DBs play one-on-one with their wide receivers, then we are not DBU. This was the year that if we beat Georgia, we had a clear path. Randy Buckley says, surprised, but not completely. Looks like a perfect storm of Georgia exploiting every single weakness the defense having and breakdowns in secondary. Looked like Georgia coaching staff game plan better on both sides of the ball than our staff. And I mentioned it early, Will, and you did too, the play calling from James Coley, offensive coordinator there for Georgia, deserves some credit too. He had been under fire for the last couple of weeks for this Georgia offense there. But, I do think a lot of it was due to, you kind of saw what was coming from this Todd Grantham defense. As we said, there was more pressure than probably led to believe. There was a little more blitzing from Todd Grantham, but Georgia did a great job in picking it up, so it definitely made it look like there wasn't a whole lot of pressure coming. But, yeah, there was still a lot of soft zone coverage that is getting on a lot of fans' nerves out there, seeing that time and time again.
Yeah, they did a lot of little things, too. I mean, we saw Swift pick up some blitzes, too. Mm-hmm. From out, their receivers running good routes for a change, like that helped them out a little bit, So I agree with the person who tweeted it. It was just as much as I said earlier that this was the absolute wrong time for Florida to have this type of performance. I'm a big believer in like law of averages where things sort of even out over time. And so I do like the idea that, hey, Georgia was due for this type of performance because if you look at their roster, yeah, their wide receivers are unproven, but they're still pretty talented. And so that was kind of like the weak point for them. Their defense was a little bit questionable, but they were getting guys healthy too. And they got a couple of key guys back that helped them out. So, yeah, just a lot of combination, a lot of factors. But to the larger point of just this being a game where Georgia was probably a little bit due for as well, I could kind of buy that without obviously giving an excuse to Florida. But, yeah, that's part of it too, I think.
Maybe we'll get a game next year where Georgia's just kind of coming in and don't have to hear negative things coming into the game for a week. So, I mean, last year it was the LSU. They were coming off the LSU game where they had their worst performance of last year and had to hear 2 weeks of how bad they were. And this is another year where they got lost to South Carolina, struggled against Kentucky. We heard for 2 weeks how bad they were. And they seem to. But look, this comes into a little bit of the next couple of tweets here kind of feed into that as too. Mario C says proper planning prevents piss poor performance. So the personnel issues defensively and the lack of adjustments offensively are hurting us. Still like Mullen and Grantham moving forward, but whether you recruited them or not, we have to scheme and prepare better. Beating ourselves, we mentioned that a little bit. Yeah, the blame can go both sides of the ball. Look at it, the grand picture things. If you give up 24 points to Georgia, I felt good about a win there, but also the performance on defense was definitely not acceptable either. Ralph, I guess Seegobin, Seegobin. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Disappointed, but not all that surprised. Thought we'd score a bit more. I'm not going to rag on the defense too much, despite the inability to stop Georgia on 3rd and long, because giving up 24 points in retrospect isn't too bad. Kudos to Fromm. He made some throws. Dylan Young says, I will not understand the zone coverages. I just won't. It's on film multiple times this year that if you man up on the Georgia wide receivers, they're average at best. I was proud of the run D yesterday. This loss is simple. Horrible 3rd down defense calls, in my opinion, and those sacks Trask took. JB White says, my take, well, here we go. One that's a little different here. This game wasn't about recruiting. That's a crutch. We need to drop it. Yes, we're ahead of schedule and we're in great shape going forward, but face it, we didn't have as good as a plan as Georgia, and we didn't execute as well as they did. The booth review screwed us too. My thing is, just because you want to say it's not recruiting or it is recruiting or it was the game plan or not the game plan, here's the thing. 2 things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, and it was on Saturday. Like we talked about, the clear difference to me was one team had a stellar elite group of offensive linemen. One team really didn't. And that showed up in little ways, and it showed up in big ways sometimes too, where, I mean, we saw Florida make a switch on their personnel with the guards again.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the tackles not really have a great performance and get blown off a couple of times. And that didn't really happen for Georgia against some really good pass rushers that Florida has. Yeah, guys were banged up. We didn't really talk about it, but Jeremiah Moon left the game too. So that was another guy that they were missing out on. But still, like, you have guys on that Florida roster capable of getting to the QB, and they didn't. And so, yeah, part of it was the fact that Georgia looked like it flat out outcoached the Gators, but still they also have better players. So yeah, both could be true. I mean, it's just one thing you could kind of fix right now, and that's get better players. You can't play the game over. So not until next year, at least.
Right. Last few thoughts here. Taylor Chase, more disappointed than anything. We looked lost on defense for 3rd down most of the game. Their offensive line bullied us for 4 quarters. Mullen called an okay game, but the offensive line is still very bad. Talent gap was obvious, and scoring only 17 points isn't going to win you many games. Dan Mullins at Jumpman Todd 2 says Florida fans need to calm down. They're on here acting like Georgia won by 40 and the entire coaching staff needs to go. I think we are facing another 10-2 season with a New Year's 6 game. Nothing wrong with back-to-back New Year's 6 games in Mullins' first 2 years. Calm down. Gator Rilla says Florida State, Miami are way down. Need to lock down the state. Everyone is coming in and pushing the big guys. We get the leftovers. No excuses. Lock down the border and get elite guys, or we will continue to not be elite. Mullen needs to overhaul this staff. Well, we've seen it a lot. Yeah, we can't. You laugh there. I'm sure you've seen it out there as well. Many people think, to a fault, Dan Mullen is loyal to his staff and the staff that's been with him for so long. You've been around the guys for a few years now, back at Mississippi State and Florida. Not anything to, I'm not asking you to shed any light on anything you may know, may not know, but is our personnel staff's going to happen by Dan Mullen's choice, or do you feel inclined that it may happen?
I don't anticipate changes just because, like, The offense works because of continuity a lot of times. If you talk to Dan Mullen, he'll bring that up a lot. Whereas if it's the play calling, if it's the knowledge of personnel, it's the way he likes to do things, what he likes to teach, what he values. A lot of it comes down to the continuity of having worked with John Hevesy on the offensive line, having worked with Billy Gonzalez, Brian Johnson, Greg Knox, all those guys on the offensive side of the ball. Now, if it comes to a point where like the recruiting is just getting worse, or just not being able to keep up at all, then maybe like you have to sort of say to yourself, if you're the head coach, like how much do I sacrifice here? But I just don't think that Dan Mullen sees it to that point yet. So I don't anticipate anything. Lastly, on that note about the differential in talent, it kind of did show up in little ways. I mean, even like that safety LeCount on that 4th and inches play against Kyle Pitts, he was the one who broke that up. That kid's a 5-star kid from a couple of classes ago. So it's like just little things like that. And so like the person who said like it's not a showing of that, well, you got to like rewatch and look and see which guys are making plays, which guys aren't. And if you kind of compare that, you see that, hey, so-and-so was a 5-star 2 years ago, and this kid was a 3-star or a low-end 4-star type of kid. And I hate to kind of like put those type of labels on kids like that, but most of the time they're pretty accurate, or fairly accurate at least.
All right, last couple tweets here. One from fan, and then one that kind of just highlights Florida struggles on third down here. Gator for life at BOL Gator at Bowl Gator says, was what I expected before the season. 10-2 losses to Georgia and LSU. Not disappointed at all. We hung with 2 top 10 teams that have superior talent, loaded with 5 stars, and healthy first-string quarterbacks. Mullen hasn't finished year 2 yet. We'll be fine for the future. And then a couple tweets I noticed, and just kind of looking at some stuff from the game last night. Alligator Army here from the SB Nation site. In Florida's 17 wins under Dan Mullen, opponents have converted 81 of 252 third downs, 32%. In Florida's 5 losses under Mullen, opponents have converted 41 of 67 third downs at 61%. So about a 30% jump in losses, in third down and losses from this Gator defense here. And then Jason Starrett here, I'm trying to figure out where he's from, senior editor for, The Athletic. There we go. Really highlights Todd Grantham. It will.
A fun statistic. I don't know if it means a whole lot, but it is interesting.
True. Yeah. Georgia converted a season-high 12 third downs versus Florida. It's most against a ranked team since the 2014 Belk Bowl versus Louisville. Todd Grantham was the defensive coordinator in both games. So I'm not trying to turn the knife here, Gator fans. In what was
I'm trying to say something about the third down, David.
Do what?
What are you trying to say about third downs?
Third and Grant. I said it earlier. Third and Grantham's alive and well. And here's the thing, though.
Sure.
And that was such a big detriment of his back at his time in Georgia as a defensive coordinator. He hung around for a little while more, and then it went away for a couple seasons. The third and Grantham, it really couldn't have been brought up for a few seasons with him as a defensive coordinator. But now here, everybody remembers that nickname, and every time a third down happens, that's where it goes. But now it's becoming a trend this year, and especially in the big games for Florida. Well, I mean, LSU didn't have many third downs to begin with, so that one doesn't really contribute to the stat all that much. But it has reared its head again for Todd Grantham.
Yeah, it has. A little bit different. I think like in Georgia, he got that nickname mainly because fans were upset with like the amount of times he blitzed on like third and longs, and they ended up getting a little bit burned on some of those. Here it's a little bit different. So yeah, same result though. I mean, they're giving up far too many conversions on third down.
All right, let's take a look around the SEC right quick before we go and what happened here. 45-14 Texas A&M over Texas San Antonio. Mississippi State, 54-24 over Arkansas, a game that was not even close, 14-0 after the first quarter. Auburn squeaks by Ole Miss, 20-14. Tennessee continues their winning ways, 30-7 over UAB. So Tennessee now 4-5 on the season, and South Carolina 24-7 over Vanderbilt. So, and then Georgia, of course, takes the lead in the SEC East over Florida and Alabama LSU coming up next week. Probably will decide the SEC West there. And then, of course, just mentioned it because of the Willie Taggart firing, but Miami beat FSU yesterday 27-10. So we're kind of setting up now. Georgia takes control in the East. Not completely over for the Gators and the hopes for Atlanta. Georgia still has Missouri, Auburn, Texas A&M. They'd have to lose 2 of those. Florida would have to win out for Florida to go to Atlanta. So not completely done yet. We'll see how Georgia responds after this Florida game. So still some stuff to play for in that regard as well. But then the big matchup next week, Bama and LSU.
Yeah, definitely still a lot to play for Florida. It's just that they were the real kind of takeaway. What's different now is that they were in the college football playoff conversation, and right now they're out of it after the loss to Georgia. And so, yeah, they still have a lot of things else that are on the table, but for right now, that's no longer there for them. And the big shame was that it was just 24 hours prior, of course.
Yeah. All right, Will, man, what you got coming up with the Athletic this week? I know you're getting a whole lot of shout outs, getting a whole lot of notice, people loving what you're doing over there at the Athletic. What you got coming up?
Appreciate it, man. Probably going to hit some bigger recruiting stories for this week. Pretty timely, right? But
Yeah.
I actually had that planned anyway, so whatever. So we'll have that in the works. We'll also do some decade look back. Not exactly a happy light time, the 2010s for Florida. Some dark areas there, but we'll revisit some of that in a company-wide sort of look back on the decades, considering it'll be coming to a close this December. So a lot ahead. Obviously, the Vanderbilt game, have something on that as well next Saturday.
All right, that's Will Sammon. You can find his work at The Athletic. Get their app or head to theathletic.com. I'm David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.